Okay guys, so sorry for the shoddy camera work. I'm gonna try and do this, but this is take 3 now. I've had a couple people that have asked me how to use the jig that I made for doing cutting board ends. So kind of walk you through. This is the jig. Hopefully you can see it. I know the camera is kind of weird. This is my prototype, so version 1 that kind of is all dirty and nasty and glue everywhere, and I have since made it a little bit better. But to give you an idea, this is the jig. So the way it works is you put this on the face of the piece of wood. So for my example here, I'm gonna try and do this, but it's not a very good setup because I don't have any cutting boards that I need to do right now. So basically you put it over the piece of wood, fits on just like this. So I'm just using 2 little pieces of wood that I just stuck together right now. They're not glued together or anything like that because I don't have any cutting boards. But the way you do it is you'll go through, you will find your center point. So 15 inches, so I'll make a little mark at 7.5. You'll also go through, make your center line here. Obviously this is 2 equal boards, so luckily for me there is a center line that I can see. So what you'll normally do is you'll go through and mark, I'm just going to do it rough for now because it doesn't really matter. And then you'll mark your center line here or here. You can just make a little tick mark because there is an indicator right here, a little line that'll, I don't know if you can see that, it's kind of washing out in the light. There you go. A little bit of a line, and then there's also a center line right here, right there, that shows you where the center of the jig is. So what you do there, you just go, put it over your board. When I do it, I usually go and I will have the side closest to me loose, and then I will kind of loosen this one a little bit. I will line up the center line on the line. I will tighten up the back side, and then I will pinch these together with the clamps. And then once they're pinched together with the clamps, I just use quick clamps. Obviously if you're doing a cutting board, the way it'll work is your clamps will kind of come in off the side a little bit. For this example, it's just going to come in from the bottom to kind of show you guys how it works. Line up the little indicator, the little tick mark on the very bottom with the line to show the center point. And then once it's clamped in place, you're pretty much ready to start routing. Make sure this is nice and flush. Since these are just floating pieces, it's kind of hard. Normally with a regular cutting board it would be nice and flush, you wouldn't have to worry about it. I have kind of a weird little setup here. Now the thing is with this, you can do it and you can use a jig that's made out of plywood like this one right here. I'm using it to hold down my clamps so they don't fall off the table, but it's basically just a piece of plywood. You cut a little hole in. I used my CNC to make this one, and then you can go and put a little board here. That'll be your indicator. You'll have to do all the measuring from the opposite side, and then you just set this right on, use this little board or little piece of wood as your indicator, butt it up to the edge, clamp it down however you're going to clamp it down, and then you can route out with your router from the top and just do it just like that. Now the thing I don't like about this, number one, depending on what you're clamping, sometimes you clamp it from the top and then it gets in the way of your router base, just like it did right there where it hit, and then you can't get your entire jig or your entire cut. Or you can't really see from the top of there what you're going through because you can't see through plywood. If you can, more power to you, but I can't see through plywood. So with this one, you can see all the way through. You can see what you're going to cut, where it's going to cut at. There's a ruler that's integrated in here on the bottom. It's all to scale, and you can go, it's lengthwise as well as widthwise, so you can make sure, and you can just visually, if you really need to, you can visually center your board using the tick marks on there if you don't measure it on here. That's why I put them in there, but it's easier for me just to go and use a tape measure, mark the center, and go from there. Once this is secured, the way I do it, there's several ways you can do it. The way I do it is I use the brass bushings. So I got a kit from Rockler, a little brass bushing kit. It comes with several different sizes. So to explain to you the difference between the bushings and what you can do with the router, you can offset the bit. Now if you use a bigger bushing than the size of the bit, for example, use this larger bushing with a smaller bit. So you can see the size of those, it doesn't match up. So the bit can go, and it's not going to be centered. My camera is not focusing, but it's not going to be centered. The bit's going to be a little bit offset to the inside of the bushing. So when this bushing rides along your jig, your bit is not going to go all the way out to the edge. So you can still use the one that I have that's 5.5 inches by 1 inch, and you can use a bigger bushing and you can offset your bit to the inside and cut a smaller hole. What you can do that for is you can put a little spacer block inside. These clamps on the side, or the angle pieces on the side that holds your piece of wood there, they go just over about an inch, maybe an inch and an eighth, and they go just over that. So if you have a board that's smaller than that, one, you're not really going to be wanting to make really small handles because you won't be able to put your fingers in there. But if you really wanted to, you can go and you can run this with a smaller bit, and you can put an inside offset and make it smaller than the jig itself. So you don't necessarily have to buy the smaller faceplates or different size faceplates, but I can make them. It's not too difficult on my end. I can do custom sizes if need be. So the way it works, the way I do it, is I will use the 5/8 inch brass bushing. Now, one thing to note, when you buy the bushings, they come very large. So it's just over 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch sticking up off the base plate. So if I were to stick this on there and then try and run it on here, well, obviously it's going to go right into the piece of wood, and my base plate for the router isn't going to be sitting flush with the top, so you can have a tendency to wobble, and then it can have a tendency to go and bite into the plastic, or you can actually use the bit and chew out the wood at an outward angle, and it defeats the purpose of having this all together. So what I do is I'll take my bushings over to the disc sander, and very carefully I will sand off a little bit to make it just shy of 1/4 inch. So these pieces of acrylic are 1/4 inch thick, so I'll go and have it to where it floats just above the surface of the wood and it doesn't actually touch the surface of the wood. So it gives me a little bit more wiggle room, and so I can easily do it that way. So I also put a little bit of blue painter's tape on here, just to give me a little bit more space. I don't want to, just me personally, I don't want to run my bit right along the edge of here. I like to have a tiny little bit of wiggle room, just to make sure I don't chew up the plastic. Because, unless you really want to buy a bunch of these plates, if you make a mistake and nick the plastic, then more power to you. But you want to keep the edge very smooth, because that's what your bushing is going to ride on, and that's what's going to make your edge smooth. That's the whole reason for having this jig to begin with, is to make it a smooth opening, so you don't have to worry about your router table moving on you or the piece of wood moving on you, and then you get those little nice chunks taken out of the wood. So what I'll do is, usually I use a rockler 5/8 inch round over bit. Kind of has a little bit of a flat profile at the top of the bit. I like this one because when you go through and you route the entire thing, well, obviously this is 1 inch thick. The bit is only 5/8 of an inch, so you're going to have a little bit of gap in the center that you're going to have to kind of clear through, or clear out. I like the flat bottom because that's easier to clear it out, and you don't have a bunch of ridges on the inside. So I like this bit personally. Another thing that I do, I'll go a little bit deeper than most people will, because I want to be able to run an 1/8 inch round over bit and go back through, after I take the jig off and bore out my hole, I want to go back through and round it over so that I have a nice smooth edge. It cuts down on sanding time. So, another thing to note, I'm using a Milwaukee trim router. You can use a router that has a plunge router capability. I'm just doing it with the trim router because most people have a trim router. I could do it with the plunge router, but I like to show it this way. So when I start off with a 1/2 inch round over bit. As you can see, it goes right through my 5/8 inch bushing. So when I do that, that allows me to go start smaller, so I'm not starting with the bigger bit right away, because obviously the 5/8 inch bit, it is the same size as the bushing, so it does not go through. So if I were to put this bit in right away, I'm basically trying to plunge out the material, and it can catch very easily and just go and run off and go right into the plastic. So you don't want to do that. I start off with a smaller bit, bore out enough room to where I can get this bit all the way in there, and I can bore out the rest of it. So I actually bore out a smaller hole in the beginning than I need to, but it makes it easier and it makes the jig last a lot longer. So what I'll go through, I will set this up. Now, as good as this Milwaukee router is, when I loosen this up to plunge it up and down, there's still a little bit of wiggle room, and I don't want that bit to go into the bushing. So what I do is I actually go through, I'll take a small pass, only having it a little bit past the bushing. I'll take a small pass, hog out some of the material, I'll stop the router, open it up, lower it a little bit more, close it again, lock it in, go another pass, and I'll do a couple passes until I'm satisfied that I can get this bit in there deep enough to where I'm not worried about it hitting the edge. So I will set that up. You want to use dust collection with this because it makes a lot of chips inside. And if you don't collect those chips, what will end up happening is the chips will collect on the edge of the guide and it won't cut all the way up to the edge that you want it to. So I'll show you a little bit of what happens there. Take some small passes, you lift it off a little bit, and then you go through and hog out the material. Kind of wiggle it back and forth a little bit. Get it to dig down in the material. Stop it. Go a little bit deeper. Not sure how well you can see it on camera, but there is a couple ridges in here that are made from the router bit because it is a complete round over bit. So it does create a couple ridges in there. So you want to kind of do a pass going around and then clear out the center area as well. So I'll keep going. I got a little bit more material until I can get the other bit in there. Thing to also note is I like to stop the router as it's down in the groove, because if you lift the router you have a tendency to kind of not lift it straight up and you can take a chunk out of the plastic. You also set it down in there first before starting it up. before I start the router, I'll put it down into the jig. I'll make sure the bit's touching the wood, and then I'll leave one side touching, and I'll slightly lift up, just ever so slightly, the other side to make sure that when I start the router it's not contacting the wood, because if it is, it'll throw the bit into the side. And then I slightly lean it down, I lower it down into the wood as I move it away, so it starts to dig into the wood as it cuts. So right now, you could easily just do another pass in there with the same bit. Make sure the bottom is nice and smoothed out, because there are some ridges, because I just kind of went through there really quick. You can call this it. I mean, it's still not quite the full 1 inch by 5.5 inches, but it is a nice smooth straight edge. You could easily use this as your cutting board. Your fingers still fit in there, even with a 1/2 inch bit and a 5/8 inch bushing. But I like to make sure that it's nice and smooth up to the edge. I like to do the entire one. But I need to make sure that this is kind of a large bit, and I want to make sure that it gets down as far as I can into there. I usually make mine pretty deep, like I said, to get the round over in there, and I want to make sure I get that in there, because right now, if I tried to put the round over, it's not even going to get anywhere near the edge, and the bearing, or the screw on the end of the bearing, hits the wood. That'll cause burning, and obviously it doesn't even touch the edge of the wood. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change out the bit, and then I'm going to continue with the larger router bit. Now obviously take the batteries out whenever you change any bits, then you don't have a chance to cut yourself. This router I have to take off the dust collection in order to get to it, because I'm going to put the larger bit that I have to put on the exterior of the bushing. So now I put this back on. One thing with the tape too is it does have a tendency to kind of collect some sawdust if you go the opposite way. So you want to make sure when you put it on, it's kind of like putting the thread lock tape on plumbing. So you want to make sure you go with the threads. I'm going to stick this one in there. And one of the reasons I like this bit is because it has a long shank, so you can go and you can put it deep, and you can put it above so that the collet on your router doesn't run into the bushing because the shank's too short. So I do like the Rockler bits. Plus, Rockler, they have a lifetime warranty on their router bits, which is nice. Alright, now that that's in, hook the dust collection back up. Now if you have this Milwaukee router, little trim router, you'll notice that the knob on there is really small and it's kind of hard to get your fingers around. So one tip you can do is use a Dremel with a cutting edge, and you can put a little notch in there so you can use a flathead screwdriver and do it that way. Much easier. Alright, so I'm going to set this bit just above where it's touching. It's not exactly touching the bushing, just above, so it doesn't nick the bushing. And then I'll go back through. same thing. Now it's completely flush with the plastic edges. Normally I would continue, go down a little bit deeper a couple times until I can fit this bushing or the router bit for the roundover in there. I probably need another, just over 1/8 of an inch to go down further. I go down a little bit further so the bearing or the screw on the end of the bearing doesn't have any chance to touch. So I make sure it has some extra clearance in there. But you can go down there, do the roundover. That's pretty much it. So then you can go take the jig off. And normally, if this wasn't two separate boards, it would be a nice, too much lighting in here, but it would be a nice straight cut. There's no edges on there that are jagged. It's nice and smooth. Depending on your router speed and type of wood you're going to cut, you want to make sure you don't burn the wood too much because it's kind of a pain to get in there and sand. But that's pretty much it. So that kind of gives you an example, if you can see it in there, of how straight and clean the cut is. But yeah, pretty much it. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. Like I said, the jig, super simple to use and pretty user friendly. There's not a whole lot to it. It has the indicator marks that make it very simple. It's lightweight. You can toss it in a drawer. Pretty much it. And you can use it on a bunch of different stuff, not just cutting boards. Anything you want to handle in. Thanks.